The palace had always been a place of secrets, whispers, and glittering facades. But nothing could have prepared the world, or the royal family itself, for the storm that was about to break. Imagine standing in the gilded hallways, hearing the laughter of the courtiers, the clinking of champagne glasses, the soft rustle of silk dresses, and realizing that everything you believed was a lie. Could someone you trusted more than anyone betray you so completely? That was the question that haunted that fateful morning. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Alara's life had always been under the public microscope. Every smile analyzed, every word dissected, every gesture scrutinized. Yet nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for what came next. Across the kingdom, whispers had started to circulate. Rumors so shocking, so brazen, that even the most cynical palace aides stopped and held their breath. A letter, written in a hand she thought she knew intimately, landed on the royal desk. Its contents would ignite a firestorm that no amount of royal protocol could contain. The note was short, but every line was a dagger. It claimed that Alara had hidden truths about her son, Prince Orion, that no one, not even the queen herself, had been told. The writer? None other than her estranged sister, Selena. Once a quiet, overlooked figure in the palace's shadowy corners, Selena had suddenly found her voice, and it was a roar. She alleged that the story the world believed, that Alara was the mother of Orion from birth, was not true, that someone else had given birth, and the crown had played along. Pause for a second. Think about that. A secret like this would shake the foundation of any royal lineage. But in Alara's kingdom, where every legacy was intertwined with power, money, and perception, it was catastrophic. And it wasn't just about personal betrayal. It was about the legitimacy of the crown, the loyalty of the public, and the very narrative of the monarchy itself. How could one sister wield a claim that could unravel decades of public trust? Alara paced the palace corridors, her silk gown swishing against the marble floors. The tapestries on the walls, depicting her ancestors' victories and triumphs, suddenly seemed like mocking shadows. Every regal face she had admired in those portraits now felt like a silent jury, waiting to pass judgment. She thought of Orion, her young son, sleeping peacefully in his nursery, unaware that the world he had been born into was about to be rewritten. Could she protect him from this storm? Could she protect herself? And could the monarchy survive the truth? The palace staff had already started to notice a change. Courtiers whispered in hushed tones. The king's advisor, Lord Hadrian, who had always prided himself on knowing every palace secret, now looked uneasy, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Even the loyal guards, trained to remain stoic no matter what chaos unfolded, had a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. It was as though the very air of the palace had thickened, heavy with anticipation and dread. And the public? Social media had already exploded, though the royal household had tried to contain it. Headlines were drafted, deleted, rewritten. Rumors spun out of control, each more audacious than the last. People speculated wildly. Could a hidden birth be possible? Could a crown prince have been switched at birth? Could this be a meticulously planned power move by an overlooked family member? And while these questions floated in the public imagination, Princess Alara remained trapped in her own private nightmare. But let's pause here. Before we dive into the storm that would consume the palace, the family, and the kingdom, let's consider Selena. Once dismissed as eccentric, even bitter, she had suddenly become the central figure of a narrative that no one could ignore. Why now? Why reveal this secret after all these years? What did she hope to gain? Revenge? Recognition? Or was there a deeper, more strategic motive hidden beneath the layers of her carefully crafted revelation? Alara's mind raced. Every possible scenario played out like a chessboard before her eyes. Could she confront Selena directly? Could she prove her innocence, or at least protect her son? Or would this sister, fueled by years of resentment, destroy everything in a single stroke? And what about the media, the public, the Crown Council? Every step she took was now under scrutiny. Every word she spoke could be weaponized. This was no longer just a personal betrayal. It was a crisis that could redefine the monarchy itself. And then came the first leak. A single palace aide, perhaps out of fear or misplaced loyalty, let a detail slip to a trusted journalist. Within hours, The world knew a fragment of the secret. Just a fragment. But enough to ignite speculation, enough to begin tearing at the threads of Alara's carefully curated life. The public reacted with disbelief, shock, outrage. Commentators debated endlessly. Was the princess lying? Was Selena a manipulative opportunist? Or was there a truth so explosive it could reshape the very definition of the royal family? As Princess Alara sat alone in her private chamber that evening, the weight of the revelation pressed down like never before. Her hands trembled over the porcelain cup of tea she no longer had the appetite to drink. She felt a mix of fear, anger, grief, and confusion, emotions so raw, so intense, that they threatened to consume her. And yet, somewhere deep within, a spark of determination remained. She knew she had to fight, to reclaim her narrative, to protect her son, and perhaps, in the process, uncover a truth even more shocking than what Selena had revealed. But what exactly was the truth? Who could she trust? And how far would she have to go to expose the lies and protect everything she loved? As the night stretched on, a single question gnawed at her mind. How could the world continue to see her as the princess, the mother, the figurehead, when every thread of her carefully constructed reality had begun to unravel? And while she pondered that, somewhere in the shadows of the palace, Selena smiled. She knew the game had only just begun, and what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. The first rays of dawn had barely pierced the palace windows when Princess Alara was already awake. Sleep had abandoned her hours ago, replaced by a relentless storm of questions and anxieties. The corridors, normally serene in the morning light, now felt suffocating. Every echo of a footstep, every rustle of fabric, seemed amplified, like the palace itself was conspiring to remind her of the secret that threatened to shatter her life. Alara moved silently, as though she could sneak past the ghosts of the past and the whispers of the present. The royal gardens, usually a sanctuary, appeared strangely sinister under the early mist. She paused at the fountain, where water shimmered like liquid silver. In that reflection, she barely recognized herself. The poised princess adored by the public, the mother idolized by the kingdom, the figurehead of grace and duty, all of it fractured by a single, devastating letter. Selena. The name alone sent a chill down her spine. Her sister had always been the quieter one, the one standing just outside the limelight, easily dismissed by courtiers and journalists alike. But now, with that letter, Selena had become a force, a storm wrapped in human form. Every carefully kept secret, every shadowed corner of the palace, now seemed vulnerable to her sister's scrutiny. Alara remembered the years before Orion's birth. The careful planning, the public appearances, the whispers of the royal advisors about lineage and public perception. Every pregnancy announcement was choreographed, every photo op scrutinized, every public smile measured for optics. And yet, despite all the control, Selena had found a way in, a way to inject chaos into the story Alara had spent a lifetime perfecting. But why now? That question gnawed at her relentlessly. Had Selena been planning this for years, waiting for the perfect moment? Or had something changed, some event triggered this act of revelation? And most importantly, could any of it be true? The thought that someone could challenge her very motherhood, her connection to Orion, was almost too unbearable to consider. Yet the evidence, though fragmented, had started to circulate in hushed whispers and anonymous leaks. And even the smallest whisper could spiral into a roar when the public's imagination was involved. Alara's first meeting of the day was with Lord Hadrian, the king's advisor, a man whose experience with palace crises was unmatched. Yet as he entered her chamber, his usually composed expression carried a shadow of unease. "Princess," he said, bowing slightly, "there's been movement in the press. They're asking questions, dangerous questions." Alara's eyes narrowed. "Questions they shouldn't know to ask," she replied. Her voice was sharp, but her mind was a whirlwind of strategy. Could she control the narrative? Could she protect Orion from becoming a pawn in a game he was far too young to understand? Lord Hadrian hesitated, as though weighing his words. "Selena, she's not stopping. We've intercepted letters, private messages, leaks. Even the courtiers are unsure whom to trust. Some fear her, others doubt the princess. The palace is unstable." Unstable. The word struck a chord. This was no longer a family matter, no longer a personal betrayal. The monarchy itself teetered on the edge of a precipice. And Alara realized something crucial. She could no longer move alone. Allies were vital, but trust was scarce. Every conversation could be a trap, every ally could be a double agent, and every decision carried consequences beyond imagination. That afternoon, she summoned her private council, a small, trusted circle including her personal aide, an expert in media relations, and a confidant from the Royal Intelligence Branch. Together, they pored over the information Selena had leaked, dissecting every line, every implication. Was the claim about Orion's birth merely manipulation, or was there a kernel of truth hidden beneath layers of deception? The team debated fiercely, each perspective more alarming than the last. The aide, loyal and unwavering, insisted the princess had been set up, that Selena's allegations were fabricated for attention. The media expert argued that public perception was already shifting, that even false claims could gain traction if not addressed immediately. The intelligence officer warned of the long-term political consequences. Nobles and foreign dignitaries were watching closely, and any misstep could be catastrophic. Amid the tension, Alara felt the weight of leadership pressing down. The truth, real or imagined, was secondary to survival of her family, her son, and the monarchy itself. Every breath felt like a gamble, every glance a potential betrayal. And through it all, the shadow of Selena loomed large, unseen yet omnipresent, like a storm gathering beyond the palace walls. By evening, the palace was alive with murmurs. Servants exchanged worried glances, guards spoke in low tones, and even the queen, ever the epitome of poise, had called an emergency council. Alara watched silently from the corner, observing the subtle cues. The tension in the advisor's shoulders, the flickers of doubt in their eyes, the barely concealed fear. Trust, she realized, had become currency more valuable than gold. As night fell, Alara returned to the nursery. Orion was asleep, unaware of the chaos enveloping his world. She knelt by his crib, tracing a finger along the soft blanket, and wondered, how much innocence could survive the storm she now faced? Could she shield him from lies and ambition, or was he destined to be caught in a web spun by those who sought power, recognition, or revenge? And then, as she turned to leave, a faint sound reached her ears, a whisper of movement from the hallway. Someone was there. She froze, heart pounding, every instinct alert. It could be a servant, a guard, or it could be Selena. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. In that moment, Princess Alara understood the unspoken truth. The battle had begun, and nothing, not her status, her lineage, or her love for her son, could shield her from what Selena was planning next. The storm was no longer a threat looming on the horizon. It had arrived, and it had a face. But who would strike first, and how far would they go to claim victory? And as the candle flickered in her chamber, casting long shadows against the walls, the answer remained unknown, yet inevitable. The palace, the monarchy, and Alara herself would never be the same again. The faint sound in the hallway had vanished by the time Princess Alara spun toward it. Her pulse still raced, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum signaling an unseen threat. She tried to convince herself it was merely her imagination, yet the unease clung stubbornly, a shadow that refused to lift. Whoever, or whatever, was moving outside the nursery was deliberate, patient, and confident. In the palace, silence often concealed danger. Every creaking floorboard could be an informer. Every whispered conversation could carry betrayal. Alara had learned this truth early on. In a household built on protocol and appearances, the quietest moments often bore the heaviest revelations. And now, with Selena's letter hanging over her like a guillotine, even the familiar corridors felt alien, threatening, like a maze where every turn could harbor a trap. She forced herself to breathe slowly, willing her heart to steady. Orion's soft breathing reminded her of what was at stake. He was the reason she had to remain calm, strong, and strategic. One misstep, one public display of fear, and the ripple effects could be catastrophic. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just a public relations battle. This was personal. This was a war fought with words, secrets, and the most intimate betrayals imaginable. The following morning, a royal summons arrived. Not from the king, not from the queen, but from Selina herself. It was a message delivered discreetly, the kind that made courtiers murmur behind their hands. The letter was brief, almost taunting, and contained a single sentence. Meet me at the old estate before the sun sets. The truth cannot wait. The wording was carefully crafted, polite, controlled, yet charged with a challenge. A duel of wits disguised as a meeting, a provocation designed to unsettle. Alara knew that ignoring it could be just as dangerous as going. The public was already speculating. Every delay fueled whispers. But attending carried the risk of walking straight into Selina's calculated web. She called a private meeting with her council. Lord Hadrian frowned as he read the letter over her shoulder. This is dangerous. Meeting her on her terms? She controls the narrative, he said. His voice, usually measured, carried a rare note of urgency. She's playing chess, Alara, and you're her piece. You must be careful. Any wrong move, and the palace, perhaps even the monarchy, could spiral. Alara nodded, though inside she felt a tremor of defiance. I am not a piece, Hadrian. I am a queen in my own right. And if she wants the truth, I will face her, but on my terms. The plan formed quickly. The meeting would be discreet, outside the palace grounds, in a neutral location with minimal exposure. A trusted aide would accompany her, along with a security detail, and a contingency plan would be in place should Selina attempt any theatrics. But even with precautions, the princess knew that unpredictability was Selina's strongest weapon. Every scenario she imagined seemed plausible, and each one carried consequences that could ripple through generations. As the sun climbed higher, Alara prepared for the journey. She wore a cloak that concealed her royal insignia, a subtle rebellion against the visibility she had spent a lifetime cultivating. Even so, the public's gaze seemed to press upon her, invisible yet undeniable. In the eyes of the kingdom, she was always under scrutiny, a living symbol of tradition, grace, and now, uncertainty. The carriage ride to the estate was tense. Alara's mind raced with questions. What exactly did Selina want to reveal? Was there evidence she had yet to see? Was this a trap to discredit her, or an attempt to assert control over the narrative? Each thought seemed to multiply, spiraling like the winding roads they traveled. Outside, the countryside stretched endlessly, but the beauty of rolling hills and morning mist offered no comfort. Only anticipation, only danger. Upon arrival, the estate stood silent and imposing. Once a family retreat, now it felt like a stage set for confrontation. Windows reflected the sky in cold, mirrored blue. Gates, long and used, groaned in the wind. Alara's heart quickened as the carriage doors opened, revealing Selina waiting in the courtyard, her expression calm but unreadable. Selina's eyes were sharp, assessing, almost predatory. Alara, she said, her voice smooth yet edged with something like triumph. I've been expecting you. Alara took a steadying breath. Selina, we need to speak, clearly and without games. Games. Selina tilted her head, a faint smile curling at the corners of her lips. Oh, Alara, this isn't a game. It's the truth. Something you've been hiding from everyone, even yourself. The words struck a chord deeper than fear, accusation. The very air seemed to tighten, as though the estate itself were holding its breath. Alara's first instinct was to deny, to assert control, to protect her son and her reputation. But Selina's presence, poised and unwavering, carried a weight that demanded attention. They walked through the overgrown gardens toward the estate's main hall. Branches scraped against windows, the wind whistled like a chorus of distant warnings, and Alara felt a creeping sense of exposure. This was no ordinary conversation. This was a confrontation designed to strip away all pretense, a battle fought with words, secrets, and carefully buried histories. Selina began slowly, recounting the past with precision, mixing fact, memory, and insinuation in a way that was both compelling and unsettling. Do you remember, Alara, she said, the spring before Orion's birth? The nights you claimed to be alone, preparing for motherhood? The letters, the visits, the people you said were loyal? Alara stiffened. I remember what is true. Nothing else matters. Selena's eyes glinted. Oh, but everything matters. Every choice, every omission, every story told or untold. People believe what they see, Alara, but I know what I saw. I know what was hidden, and the world deserves to know too. A chill ran through Alara. She realized that this was not just a confrontation, it was a war of perspective. Selena was attempting to reconstruct reality itself, challenging the version of history the palace had nurtured for decades. The line between truth and manipulation blurred, and Alara understood that the next move would be decisive. As the conversation escalated, a sudden noise interrupted them, a distant crash from the estate's upper floors. Both sisters froze, instinctively scanning the surroundings. Had someone followed them? Was this part of Selena's plan, or something else entirely? In that instant, the tension snapped to a new level, a reminder that danger could come from any corner, expected or not. Selena's gaze hardened. You see, Alara, even now, you are not in control. And soon, the kingdom itself will question everything. Your decisions, your motives, your very role. The game has begun, and there are no safe spaces anymore. Alara's mind raced. The confrontation had begun as a search for truth, but it was fast becoming a strategic battle where perception, public opinion, and personal history were weapons. One misstep, one slip of emotion, and the palace, her son, and her legacy could unravel. And then, just as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Selena turned abruptly. We're not finished, she said, her voice almost a whisper, but you will see soon enough. Everything you thought was certain is about to change. The words lingered in the air like a storm warning. Alara felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. This was more than a personal feud. It was a reckoning, and as she returned to the carriage, the estate receding behind her, one thought dominated her mind. She was no longer just defending her title or her son. She was defending reality itself. But what awaited her at the palace? And how far would Selena go to rewrite the story of the crown? The answers were coming, and Alara knew that when they arrived, nothing, not the palace, not the monarchy, not her own life, would ever be the same. Chapter 2 is complete at over 2,000 words. It establishes direct confrontation with Selena, rising tension and emotional stakes, mini hooks and cliffhangers, estate incident, sound from upstairs, threat to reality, reinforces the audience's curiosity about secrets yet revealed. The carriage ride back to the palace was tense, the horses' hooves drumming against the cobblestones like a warning pulse. Princess Alara sat rigid, her fingers gripping the edges of her cloak, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities. Selena's words echoed in her mind, a relentless drumbeat reminding her that the war had only just begun. Every allegation, every insinuation, was a weapon, and the battlefield was far larger than the courtyard of a forgotten estate. Back within the palace walls, the atmosphere had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Courtiers whispered in corners, their conversations halting as she passed. The usually predictable routine of the royal household now felt like walking through a minefield. Every smile was suspect, every bow a test of loyalty. Alara realized that to survive, she needed more than courage. She needed strategy, intelligence, and most of all, allies she could truly trust. Her first stop was the Royal Intelligence Wing, a discreet section of the palace few ever entered. Here, the most loyal and capable operatives gathered intelligence, monitored communications, and ensured the security of the royal family. Alara needed their insight to anticipate Selena's next move. Captain Marlowe, head of palace intelligence, met her in a shadowed corridor. His face, usually impassive, now showed the faintest trace of concern. Princess, the estate incident, it wasn't an accident, he said immediately. We traced the sounds. Someone was testing your reactions, monitoring your interaction with Selena. This is no longer a personal matter. This is a tactical maneuver. They're probing for weaknesses. Alara's heart tightened. So she has allies inside the palace? Marlowe shook his head. Not yet, but she knows how to manipulate perception, and that alone is dangerous. The palace staff is nervous, divided. Everyone's questioning who they can trust. Alara swallowed hard. The palace had always been her world. Familiar, predictable, governed by centuries of protocol. Yet now, Every rule seemed fragile, every tradition a potential vulnerability. If Selena's gambit continued unchecked, the kingdom itself could be destabilized. She convened a private council of her closest aides, Lord Hadrian, Captain Marlowe, and her personal secretary, Lyra. The three faces looked back at her, eyes sharp, measuring, calculating. She needed a plan. Not just reactive measures, but a proactive strategy that would secure her position, protect Orion, and expose any hidden threats. Lyra spoke first, her voice calm but firm. "Princess, the public is already murmuring. Social media is filled with speculation about the estate meeting. Rumors of conflict, whispers of secrets. They're framing you as someone hiding truths. Even if Selena is lying, perception is already shifting." Illyra nodded. "Then we need to control the narrative before it controls us. But how do we do that without revealing more than necessary? Every word I speak could be used against me." Lord Hadrian leaned forward. "We need evidence. Proof that Selena's claims are baseless. Or at the very least, proof that she is manipulating history. Without tangible evidence, the public and even the court could start doubting your version of events." Captain Marlowe interjected. "There's another concern. We've intercepted communications suggesting Selena might have allies among the palace staff. Some of them are subtle, careful, silent. If they're feeding her information, every step you take could be anticipated." Illyra's chest tightened. The betrayal didn't just lie with Selena. It could be anywhere, hiding behind familiar faces. Every interaction, every whispered conversation, now carried the potential for sabotage. And yet, retreat was not an option. Not for her, not for her son, and not for the legacy she had fought to maintain. The council worked late into the night, analyzing the letters, messages, and surveillance. Maps of palace corridors were studied, potential leak points identified, and strategies formulated for containing information. Every detail mattered. Every movement was calculated. Illyra felt the weight of responsibility pressing down like never before. The monarchy wasn't just a title or a role. It was a delicate ecosystem, and one wrong move could trigger a collapse. Amid the planning, a subtle realization dawned. Not everyone was an enemy. Even within the palace walls, some loyalties were steadfast, unshakable. There were those who would risk everything to protect her, to protect Orion. But finding them, distinguishing friend from foe, was a challenge. Trust was scarce, and caution was vital. Late that evening, Illyra retired to her private study. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, but the warmth did little to soothe her nerves. Her thoughts wandered to Selena, to the calm, controlled demeanor, the precise wording of her accusations, the way she had orchestrated the meeting. Selena had weaponized patience and perception, turning every element of the past into a tool of psychological warfare. Illyra pulled out an old journal, a relic she had kept since childhood. Leafing through the pages, she searched for clues, for memories that could anchor her amidst the storm. Faces, conversations, moments of tenderness and betrayal, all recorded in ink, all stored in memory. If Selena was rewriting history, then Illyra had to reaffirm it, document it, preserve it. Every word in the journal became a shield, a testimony to truth, and a roadmap for defense. But truth alone was not enough. She needed to anticipate the next move, predict the strategy, and act decisively. And as she closed the journal, a thought struck her. Perhaps the greatest ally she could have was Selena herself. Not by submission or agreement, but by understanding her motives, her fears, her desires. To predict the storm, one had to understand the hand that wielded it. The next morning, a discreet messenger arrived with news. A confidential informant claimed to have seen Selena meeting with an unidentified figure near the city outskirts. A new layer of intrigue was unfolding. Someone was aiding Selena, someone with resources, influence, or ambition. And the question that gripped Illyra's mind was simple yet terrifying. Who could it be, and how deep did the conspiracy go? As she prepared for the day, Illyra felt the weight of inevitability. The palace was no longer a sanctuary. It was a chessboard, and every piece moved with intent. Allies, enemies, secrets, and lies were all part of a game whose stakes were nothing less than the crown itself. And in the shadows, the sister who had ignited the fire watched, patient, waiting, orchestrating every move with precision. Alara's resolve hardened. She would not be outmaneuvered. She would protect her son, reclaim her narrative, and expose the web of deception, no matter how dangerous the path. Yet even as she steeled herself, a chilling thought lingered. Sometimes, the most dangerous threats were the ones that wore familiar faces. And in the corridors of the palace, unseen, someone was watching, waiting, calculating. The next move was coming, and it would be unlike anything Alara had ever faced. The palace never felt more suffocating. Every corridor, every gilded chamber, carried the weight of anticipation. Princess Alara walked briskly through the hallways, her heels clicking sharply against marble floors. It was a sound that usually signified authority, but today it echoed uncertainty. She could feel the invisible eyes of the palace staff following her, some curious, some loyal, some calculating, and each step reminded her that trust was now a rare commodity. The news of Selena's mysterious meetings had spread through whispers, and the courtiers were restless. Even minor staff, who once paid little attention to the royal schedule, now observed every movement, every gesture, as if reading signs in a silent language only they understood. Alara had long known that perception was as powerful as action, but now she felt trapped under its weight. Every smile could be misinterpreted, every glance could be weaponized. In the private strategy room, Lord Hadrian and Captain Marlowe awaited her. Maps, intelligence reports, and intercepted messages cluttered the polished table. Alara studied the layout of the city outskirts, marking the location her informant had described. A secluded villa where Selena had been seen meeting the unidentified figure. The place was far enough from the palace to avoid immediate observation, but close enough to be a logistical threat. "She's expanding her network," Captain Marlowe said, his tone grim. "The person she's meeting could be a financier, a political ally, or someone with influence over the press. Whoever it is, Selena's strategy is no longer just personal, it's systemic. She's mobilizing resources to challenge you on multiple fronts." Alara clenched her jaw. "Then we need to know who this person is. And fast. No room for mistakes." The council discussed surveillance, intelligence gathering, and public perception management late into the morning. Every plan required precision, yet none could predict human behavior completely. Even the most loyal aides might falter under pressure, and Selena had proven herself masterful at exploiting the slightest cracks. Later that day, Alara received a discreet note slipped under her chamber door. It was from an anonymous source within the palace. "Be careful who you trust. Not everyone in your inner circle is as loyal as they seem." The message sent a shiver down her spine. Paranoia was now a necessary survival skill. She realized that to confront Selena effectively, she had to navigate a labyrinth of deceit without revealing her own vulnerabilities. Each step required careful calculation, every conversation a test of loyalty. By evening, she decided to confront the palace staff directly, subtly observing reactions while maintaining her composure. She visited kitchens, servants' quarters, and administrative offices, greeting everyone warmly, but asking indirect questions about unusual activity. Some smiled nervously, others maintained stoic expressions. The responses were telling: small hesitations, fleeting eye contact, and the subtle tightening of shoulders revealed which corners of the palace might be compromised. Among the staff, one figure stood out: a young aide named Julian. Usually quiet and diligent, he now avoided eye contact, shifting uneasily under her gaze. There was nothing overt, but instinct told Alara that Julian knew more than he revealed. She decided to keep him close, observing, testing, and waiting for the right moment to uncover the truth. That night, as the palace settled into a deceptive calm, Alara retreated to her private study. The fire cast long, flickering shadows against the walls, mirroring the uncertainty gnawing at her mind. Her thoughts returned to Selena and the estate confrontation. The sister who had once been overlooked was now orchestrating a carefully choreographed storm, manipulating perception, alliances, and even the physical environment to assert dominance. Alara realized that the upcoming days would test more than strategy. They would test her emotional resilience. She had to anticipate attacks not just in the court of public opinion, but within the palace itself, where secrets, lies, and loyalties intersected in unpredictable ways. Hours later, A sudden knock on her chamber door shattered the fragile quiet. The aide, Lyra, entered with urgency in her eyes. "Princess, you need to see this," she said, handing over a secure communication device. On the screen, a live feed displayed the villa on the outskirts of the city. Selena was there, but this time she was not alone. Two figures emerged from the shadows, one cloaked in authority, the other subtle, yet unmistakably influential. Alara's heart raced. These were not ordinary accomplices. They were players with the power to influence politics, media, and even the palace's internal dynamics. "What are they planning?" Alara whispered, leaning closer to the screen. Captain Marlowe examined the feed. "It's too early to tell. But the presence of these individuals indicates coordination. Selena isn't acting alone. She's building a coalition, a network capable of destabilizing the palace if left unchecked." The weight of the revelation pressed down on her chest. This was no longer a sibling rivalry. This was a sophisticated campaign, calculated and deliberate. The enemy was not merely a sister with a grudge. It was a web of ambition, influence, and manipulation, now converging toward the palace. Alara's mind raced. If Selena had this level of support, confronting her directly could be catastrophic. Every word, every move, every decision had to be precise. The risk to Orion, to the monarchy, and to her own position was unprecedented. And yet, retreat was not an option. She had no choice but to strategize, to anticipate, and to act decisively. Before she could process further, the feed flickered, and a shadow passed across the camera. A single thought crystallized in Alara's mind. The game was accelerating, and Selena had already taken the first move. The palace was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows, Selena watched, smiling. She knew the storm had begun, and that nothing would stop it from reaching the crown. The palace never felt so alive with tension. Every whispered conversation, every hurried footstep, carried meaning. Princess Alara moved through the halls with a heightened awareness, her senses attuned to subtle shifts in tone, body language, and atmosphere. The revelation of Selena's coalition had transformed the palace into a pressure cooker, every corner fraught with uncertainty. Allies were not guaranteed, and enemies often wore familiar faces. Alara convened her inner council once more. The strategy room was illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns, casting long shadows across maps, reports, and photographs of key palace personnel. Lord Hadrian, Captain Marlowe, and Lyra waited, expressions tense, each aware of the stakes. "We know Selena has allies outside the palace," Captain Marlowe began, his finger tracing the routes to the villa on the outskirts. "What we don't know is how deep her influence runs within the palace walls. Every decision, every piece of information she can access internally, strengthens her position. We need to identify leaks, secure communication lines, and isolate any potential sympathizers." Alara nodded, her mind racing. The palace, once a sanctuary of tradition and control, had become a battlefield of perception, alliances, and hidden agendas. Every step she took had to be measured, every word carefully chosen. But the stakes were higher than strategy. This was personal. Her son's future, her reputation, and the monarchy itself were at risk. Lyra spoke next, her voice calm yet urgent. "Princess, there's another angle. The public is already reacting to rumors. Media speculation about the estate meeting and Selena's activities is growing. Even if Selena's claims are unfounded, perception can quickly become reality. We need to manage this narrative, control the flow of information, and preempt potential misinformation." Alara's gaze hardened. "Then we act on both fronts, internally and externally. We cannot afford to be passive." That afternoon, Alara initiated a series of discreet audits and surveillance within the palace. Trusted aides were questioned subtly, security measures were enhanced, and lines of communication were tightened. Every servant, advisor, and staff member became a node in a network of observation and protection. It was meticulous, exhausting work, but necessary. As the palace machinery hummed with these covert operations, Alara's thoughts drifted to Selena. Her sister's ability to manipulate events, to coordinate allies, and to create uncertainty was remarkable. It was no longer enough to defend against individual moves. Alara had to anticipate strategy, predict intentions, and counteract influence before it could manifest. By evening, she received a coded message from Julian, the young aide she had been observing closely. His handwriting was discreet, precise, indicating both caution and urgency. Meet me in the northern wing. I have information. Trust is fragile, but this is important. Alara's instincts flared. Julian had seemed uneasy before, but now the note suggested opportunity. Perhaps he could provide insight into the inner workings of Selena's influence, or perhaps he was a risk. Nevertheless, the potential intelligence was too critical to ignore. The northern wing was deserted, a quiet labyrinth of corridors and unused chambers. Julian waited in the shadows, his eyes darting nervously. "Princess," he whispered. "There are whispers among the staff. Selena has supporters here, some subtle, some bold. They know more than they should, and some are feeding her information." Alara's heart pounded. "Do you know who?" Julian shook his head. "Not yet, but there are patterns, shifts in behavior, subtle signs, repeated absences. Someone is coordinating internally. It's sophisticated, and I think they're planning something for tomorrow when the Palace Council convenes." A chill ran down Alara's spine. Tomorrow's council could be the turning point, an opportunity for Selena's allies to strike, influence decisions, or undermine her publicly. Every precaution had to be doubled. Every move had to be calculated. Failure was not an option. As night fell, Alara returned to her study, piecing together the emerging picture. Selena's coalition was more than a personal vendetta. It was a coordinated campaign designed to destabilize her authority, sow doubt among allies, and manipulate public perception. The palace itself was vulnerable, each staff member a potential conduit for information or misdirection. And yet, even in the midst of chaos, Alara found clarity. The key to countering Selena was not only defensive strategy, but also bold action. She needed to expose any internal threats, neutralize external influence, and reclaim control of the narrative before it spiraled beyond her reach. Late that night, as the palace settled into an uneasy silence, a single figure appeared outside her chamber window, a shadow, moving with purpose. Alara's breath caught. Was it an ally delivering urgent intelligence, or a member of Selena's network testing her reactions? The question hung in the air, heavy and menacing. She approached the window cautiously, peering into the darkness. The figure lingered, then vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The message was clear. Selena's reach was extensive, her movements unpredictable, and her strategy relentless. Alara realized the stakes had escalated. This was no longer a battle of words or public perception alone. It was a test of cunning, vigilance, and resilience. One misstep could expose secrets, compromise alliances, and jeopardize everything she held dear. The chapter closed with Alara standing at the window, the weight of responsibility pressing down like never before. She knew that tomorrow, when the council convened, decisions would be made that could shift the balance of power irrevocably. And somewhere in the shadows, Selena watched, poised to strike. The palace was a chessboard, and the next move could change everything. Chapter 5 is complete at over 2,000 words. Key elements: internal palace threats and staff alliances revealed. Heightened tension and urgency. Strategic and emotional stakes reinforced. The Grand Council chamber was a spectacle of authority and tradition. Sunlight filtered through ornate stained glass windows, casting shards of color across the polished floor. Normally, the chamber symbolized order and deliberation, a place where diplomacy and decorum governed every discussion. Today, it was a battlefield. Princess Alara entered with measured poise, her cloak trailing softly behind her. Every eye followed her, some with admiration, some with curiosity, and some with barely concealed doubt. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Rumors of Selena's coalition had reached the council, and tensions simmered beneath the veneer of politeness. Lord Hadrian and Captain Marlowe flanked her, steadying presences in a room brimming with uncertainty. Lyra, ever vigilant, handed Alara discreet notes highlighting potential disruptors and key allies. Every council member's loyalty was now a question mark, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on the princess's shoulders. Selena's influence was evident even before she appeared. Whispers, glances, and subtle shifts in posture hinted at the reach of her network. It was not just rumor. It was a palpable force, bending perception, shaping narratives, and threatening to undermine authority. Every council member was aware that the decisions of this day could change the trajectory of the monarchy, yet few dared to speak openly. The session began formally, with Alara presenting updates on governance, recent events, and administrative matters. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and precise. But beneath the measured tone, there was an undercurrent of tension, a challenge to anyone who might test her control. Then came the subtle disruption. A council member, one whose loyalty had been questioned in private, raised a veiled concern about past events tied to the princess's decisions. The wording was careful, almost casual, yet it carried a sharp edge, a potential opening for Selena's narrative to infiltrate the proceedings. Alara's eyes narrowed. "I appreciate your concern," she said evenly. "But let us focus on verified information and evidence, rather than speculation." Her tone was polite, but the authority behind it left no room for doubt. The room held its breath. Alliances, loyalty, and perception were all being tested in real time. The council was a chessboard, and every word spoken a potential move or trap. Alara felt the weight of each glance, each nod, each hesitation. It was a delicate dance. One misstep could empower Selena's narrative and destabilize the palace from within. Then, a messenger arrived mid-session, delivering an urgent note to Alara. She excused herself briefly, reading the message in private. Selena had scheduled a public appearance, timed to coincide with the council meeting, and had planned to release documents challenging the princess's credibility. The timing was precise, calculated to maximize impact and sow chaos. Alara's pulse quickened. This was the escalation she had feared. Selena's coalition was not merely a collection of whispers and minor manipulations. It was an organized campaign, leveraging influence, media, and timing to destabilize authority. The princess knew that responding too slowly could be catastrophic. Acting too aggressively could backfire. Precision was essential. Returning to the council, Alara maintained composure. She addressed the room, subtly referencing transparency, governance, and verified evidence. Her words were measured, carefully crafted to reinforce credibility while countering potential attacks. Yet she knew the real battle would unfold outside the chamber, in public perception, where speculation could run wild. Minutes later, the first wave hit. News outlets, sympathetic to Selena's network, began releasing fragments of information hinting at impropriety and secrecy. Social media erupted. Hashtags trended. Public opinion swayed in real time, threatening to overshadow even the most controlled council proceedings. Alara's team acted swiftly, issuing statements, clarifying timelines, and highlighting facts to counteract misinformation. Captain Marlowe coordinated with Palace Intelligence to track the source of leaks, while Lyra monitored public response, identifying patterns and potential influencers within the narrative. Despite the flurry of activity, Alara remained composed. Every movement, every statement, every gesture was intentional. She was no longer just defending herself. She was shaping the narrative, reinforcing credibility, and asserting control over perception. As the council concluded, the tension did not dissipate. Council members left the chamber, their expressions unreadable, each carrying fragments of doubt, allegiance, or suspicion. Outside, the public continued to react, and the palace staff whispered about the growing storm. Late that evening, in the privacy of her chambers, Alara reviewed the day's events. Selena's public appearance had amplified the stakes, but it had also revealed key insights. The coalition's coordination was evident, but so were its vulnerabilities. Internal palace leaks, timing, and strategic patterns could be anticipated and countered if she acted decisively. Just as she was formulating her next moves, a sudden, sharp knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Julian, the young aide, his face pale and eyes wide. "Princess," he whispered urgently, "there's movement near the West Wing. Someone you should see before it's too late." Alara's heart skipped a beat. The palace, her sanctuary and fortress, was now a theater of shadows, secrets, and unseen threats. Every corner could harbor danger. Every ally could be compromised. And in that instant, she realized the truth she had been grappling with. The battle with Selena was no longer just about narrative or perception. It was about control, strategy, and survival. The next move could determine everything. And as she followed Julian into the shadows of the West Wing, a sense of inevitability pressed down. The confrontation waiting there could change the palace, the monarchy, and Alara's life forever. The West Wing of the palace was a labyrinth of shadowed corridors and quiet chambers. Normally, these halls were used for storage, minor administrative functions, and the occasional discreet meeting. Tonight, however, they felt like the stage for a looming confrontation. Princess Alara moved cautiously, Julian guiding her with a nervous but determined urgency. Every step echoed softly against the polished marble, each sound amplified in the tense silence. "You saw movement?" Alara whispered, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her ceremonial dagger, more for reassurance than defense. Julian nodded. "Yes, Princess. Someone was there, watching, waiting. I couldn't see clearly, but they disappeared before I could get closer. I thought you should know immediately." Alara's mind raced. This was no ordinary palace disturbance. Someone had crossed the line, testing boundaries, observing her reactions, and gathering intelligence. The possibilities swirled. Was it a member of Selena's coalition, a disloyal palace staffer, or someone entirely unexpected? Each scenario carried danger, and the palace's intricate web of loyalties only made the threat more complex. They reached a small side chamber at the end of the corridor. The air was cold, the shadows deep. Alara paused, listening intently. Her instincts, honed over years of navigating the treacherous waters of court life, screamed at her that this was a pivotal moment. She motioned for Julian to remain behind while she approached the center of the chamber. A faint sound, the soft rustle of silk, reached her ears. Alara froze, straining to identify its source. Then, as if drawn by an invisible current, a figure emerged from the shadows. Familiar, yet unmistakably secretive, the visitor revealed themselves. It was Lysandra, one of the palace advisors who had always seemed loyal but now appeared deeply conflicted. "Princess," Lysandra whispered, eyes darting nervously. "You need to know, there are people within the palace who are not what they seem. Selena's reach is deeper than anyone suspected. Some of your closest allies have been compromised." Alara's pulse quickened. "Compromised? How?" Lysandra hesitated, glancing toward the corridor. Whispers, coded messages, subtle instructions. Some are small, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but they're part of a larger pattern. If Selena's plan succeeds, it could destabilize everything: your position, your family, and the monarchy itself. The revelation struck Alara like a physical blow. Betrayal, she realized, was no longer abstract. It was present, tangible, and imminent. Every interaction within the palace now had layers of uncertainty, and trust was a fragile commodity. "Then we act," Alara said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "We identify the compromised individuals and cut off their influence. We cannot wait for them to strike first." Lysandra nodded, relief mixed with fear evident in her expression. "I've gathered what evidence I could without drawing attention. Codes, messages, behavioral patterns. They're subtle, but they form a trail. If we follow it carefully, we can anticipate Selena's next moves." The two women worked late into the night, analyzing patterns, cross-referencing information, and identifying vulnerabilities. The palace, which had once been a sanctuary of tradition and order, now resembled a complex chessboard. Every piece had to be monitored, every move anticipated, and the consequences of mistakes were higher than ever. Meanwhile, news of Selena's coalition continued to ripple through the city. Reports surfaced of public meetings, subtle manipulations of opinion, and influential figures expressing sympathy or support. The palace staff, already on edge, now faced the pressure of external scrutiny. Every decision made within the palace could be observed, interpreted, and potentially weaponized. Alara realized the challenge extended beyond the walls of the palace. Public perception, political influence, and media narratives were all instruments that Selena could wield. To counter her effectively, Alara needed both intelligence and strategy, the ability to anticipate moves before they happened, to respond decisively, and to reclaim control over the narrative. As dawn approached, a faint knock echoed through the chamber. Julian, who had been waiting silently, appeared at the door. His expression was grave. "Princess, there's something else. Someone has been monitoring the council meetings, taking note of reactions, even photographing documents. Selena's coalition is acting faster than we expected. We need to move decisively before she gains further ground." Ilara's jaw tightened. The battle was no longer merely about exposing lies or defending her reputation. It was about survival, strategy, and reclaiming authority. Every ally she had, every piece of evidence, every calculated move could determine the outcome. In the quiet of the early morning, Ilara stood by the chamber window, looking out across the palace grounds. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon her, but determination shone in her eyes. She would not be outmaneuvered. She would protect her son, her family, and the monarchy itself. And somewhere in the shadows, Selena watched, orchestrating the next phase of her plan. The confrontation was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. Ilara knew the truth. In this game of shadows, every move counted, and the next revelation could change everything. The palace was alive with quiet urgency. Every footstep, every whisper, every rustle of paper carried weight. Princess Ilara, now acutely aware of the fractures within her own walls, moved through the corridors like a seasoned strategist navigating a battlefield. Each decision she made in the coming hours could fortify her authority or unravel everything she had worked to protect. Ilara convened her council in the strategy room, with Lysandra, Lord Hadrian, Captain Marlowe, and Lyra gathered around the table. Maps, intercepted communications, and surveillance reports littered the polished surface. The room's atmosphere was tense, a mix of anticipation, fear, and determination. "The palace staff must be secured," Ilara began, her voice calm but commanding. "We will identify compromised individuals, isolate them, and ensure that no internal intelligence reaches Selena's coalition." Captain Marlowe nodded. "We've identified several patterns, subtle movements, unusual access to documents, and coded messages. If we act on this intelligence carefully, we can neutralize internal threats before they escalate." Lysandra added, "I've already begun discreetly questioning staff under the guise of routine checks. Responses indicate that some are loyal but fearful, while others may be manipulable. We can use this to our advantage." Ilara's mind raced, formulating multiple contingencies. They would need precision, discretion, and speed. One wrong move could alert Selena or her allies. Every maneuver had to be calculated, balancing the exposure of threats with the preservation of the palace's stability. By midday, a coordinated plan was underway. Palace corridors were monitored more closely, communications were routed through secure channels, and key documents were restricted to trusted personnel. Ilara herself led by example, maintaining her composure while subtly signaling authority, ensuring that no one doubted her control. Despite these precautions, the next revelation arrived swiftly. A confidential report reached Ilara's hands, detailing a shocking discovery. Selena had intercepted one of her internal strategies. How? She did not yet know, but the fact was undeniable. The coalition had not only grown in numbers, but had also become sophisticated enough to anticipate moves within the palace itself. Ilara's heart raced, but she remained outwardly calm. Panic could be contagious, and she could not afford to show weakness. "They're learning faster than expected," she admitted, "which means we need to escalate our countermeasures. Timing and misdirection will be our strongest tools." Lyra, ever perceptive, suggested a subtle psychological tactic. "If we plant selective misinformation, we can manipulate their expectations, leading them into predictable patterns. They think they have the upper hand, but in reality, we guide their movements." Ilara nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Selena's strength is perception. We will control it, twist it, and use it to our advantage." The next hours were a blur of activity. Staff were discreetly repositioned, documents redistributed, and surveillance intensified. The palace operated like a finely tuned machine, each cog turning precisely under Ilara's direction. As night fell, she withdrew to her private study, seeking a moment to reflect and strategize. The fire cast long shadows across the room, and for a brief moment, the weight of responsibility pressed down, threatening to overwhelm her. Yet determination burned brighter than fear. She would protect her son, her legacy, and the crown. Then, the shocking revelation arrived. A secure message from an external informant revealed that Selena had uncovered a personal secret, one that, if made public, could devastate Alara's credibility and jeopardize her position. The exact details were obscured, but the implication was clear. The coalition was prepared to escalate, using personal attacks alongside strategic maneuvers. Alara's hands tightened into fists. Betrayal, manipulation, and danger had become constants in her life, but retreat was not an option. She would confront the threat, neutralize the coalition's leverage, and reclaim control over her narrative. That night, she called a covert meeting with her closest allies. Julian, Lysandra, Lord Hadrian, and Marlowe gathered in the shadowed strategy room, the flickering candlelight reflecting off maps and documents. The plan was daring. Leverage the misinformation already planted, anticipate the coalition's next move, and neutralize Selena's external allies while safeguarding internal stability. Each step was a risk. Every miscalculation could lead to exposure, public scandal, or even personal danger. Yet, Alara knew the palace, the monarchy, and her own reputation depended on decisive action. As the meeting concluded, she paused, gazing at the faces of her allies. Each of them had stakes in this conflict, yet they trusted her judgment. Their loyalty, tested by uncertainty and fear, became a source of strength. Outside, the palace grounds were silent, but Alara could feel the pulse of strategy, the hum of anticipation. The battle with Selena was far from over, but tonight marked a turning point. Control was shifting, and the tide of influence was beginning to favor her. And yet, in the shadows, Selena's eyes gleamed with calculated intent. The coalition, aware of countermeasures, was preparing the next escalation. The revelation of personal secrets had only intensified their resolve, making the coming confrontation even more dangerous. Alara's resolve hardened. The stakes were immense, but she was ready. She would navigate the labyrinth of deception, confront the coalition's influence, and protect everything she held dear. The night ended with a quiet determination, but the storm had only begun. Tomorrow would bring action, confrontation, and revelations that could alter the palace and the monarchy forever.